Hi, this is Jeff Strauss. I will be presenting about Act 31, which was actually the biennial budget passed in 1989 in Wisconsin, and it focused on American Indian studies, but as I'll explain, also impacts several other areas of education in Wisconsin. So my presentation overview will include first the precursors to Act 31, including landmark court cases, content and implications of Act 31 in Wisconsin, and then applications of Act 31. If you are curious and want to, after this presentation, view a video about what is Act 31 and just get it in a nutshell, I found that this video on YouTube was especially helpful. It's called What is Act 31? So to understand why Act 31 or why it was included into the budget in 1989, it's important to understand, or at least have a basic understanding of American Indians and their history as European colonists came over. As we all know, because most of us went through school after Act 31 and we received a lot of information on American Indians. A lot of the history revolves around Indians first being here, of course, but then either forcibly or through treaties being removed from their lands, given reservations, and then sometimes still being removed yet again, and then being brought back in. And on those reservations, they were also given land rights. So Act 31 revolves around some disputes between the Ojibwe tribe and Chippewa. And where these disputes come up from is that the Ojibwe of Wisconsin signed three major land cession treaties in 1837, 1842, and 1854. These treaties created four bands of Ojibwe reservations where they were sanctioned to live. However, they still retained their right to hunt, fish, and gather off reservation, which would be the ceded land that they gave to the United States government. But there was a lot of lack of understanding from non-Indians as well as Indians. Where were these places where it was okay for them to still hunt, fish, and gather? This ultimately led to a court case that began in 1976 and eventually reached the Supreme Court in what is known as the Voight decision of 1983. The federal ruling sided with the Lake Superior Band of Chippewa and Ojibwe reservation rights and interpreted the treaty as saying that it is correct for these Ojibwe people to be spearfishing or gathering or hunting on their old lands as part of their agreement with the U.S. government. There was a lot of animosity, however, as a result of this court case because there's still a lot of misunderstandings between people. And so, as a result, in 1983, there was also an ad hoc commission on racism started by the Ojibwe people. During this ad hoc commission, there was a lot of community testimony given. Animosity, like I mentioned, had risen from the court's interpretation in Voight. And the result of the ad hoc commission was a report given to DPI and the American Indian Language and Culture Education Board to develop a curriculum focusing on Wisconsin Indian history, culture, and treaty rights issues. This still did not result in a curriculum being developed, and so in 1987, a resolution was made and by the American Indian Language and Culture Education Board and given to DPI, to which DPI was charged with the task of developing the curriculum. A couple years later, in 1989, some legislators got together in the Wisconsin legislature and passed the biennial budget. And in this budget, it gave funds to Indian history And these funds were to hire staff to implement requirements, locate and develop curricular resources, train teachers, and as well as conduct conferences and workshops. So this led to several statutes in Act 31, because really Act 31 refers to the biennial budget. However, these several statutes that I'll discuss are what really impact public schools. As well, Part A of Title VII in the federal education law also impacts public schools in Wisconsin. The first statute is about general duties, then educational goals and expectations, teacher certification and licensure, school district standards, and then the federal part would be recognizing the unique needs that may not be able to be covered by state budgets. So the general duties statute states that the state superintendent shall develop a curriculum for grades 4 to 12 on the Chippewa Indians' treaty-based off-reservation rights to hunt, fish, and gather. Again, the background of this is there is a lack of understanding which led to poor Indian and non-Indian relations, and this resulted back when it was first drafted in 1989 to the creation of an instructional resource called Classroom Activities on Chippewa Treaty Rights in 1991, which has since spawned many resources related to curriculum. Educational goals and expectations were that each school board shall provide an instructional program designed to give pupils an appreciation and understanding of different value systems and cultures, and at all grade levels an understanding of human relations, particularly with regard to American Indians, Black Americans, and Hispanics. So this part of the Act brings up the need for increased human relations overall, particularly with American Indians. But again, going back to that ad hoc commission in the 80s, it was found that the root cause of all of these problems with the American Indians was an overall lack of understanding of how to relate with other humans that are diverse from you or different from you, which is why African Americans and Hispanics are also touched by this act. And it's also noteworthy that Wisconsin is a local control state. So even though this act is a state budget, each local school board had to determine their own instructional program or curriculum and how it was going to meet the requirements of the new law. It also impacted teacher preparation programs. Obviously, we can't just decide, all right, now the schools are going to do this without also training teachers to be more prepared for this. And so the state superintendent, after September 1st of 1991, was no longer able to grant licensure or certification to anyone who did not go through coursework during their teacher preparation program that included a course on the instruction in the history, culture, and tribal sovereignty of the federally recognized American Indian tribes, of which there are 11 in Wisconsin. To help those grandfathered in, even to this day, the American Indian Studies program at the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction continually holds annual conferences and a number of local, regional, and statewide trainings to provide in-service training to those already holding license to teach in Wisconsin. School district standards, except as provided in 118.40, each school board shall provide adequate instructional materials, texts, and library services which reflect the cultural diversity and pluralistic nature of American society. And beginning in September 1st of 1991, as part of the social studies curriculum, include instruction in the history, culture, and tribal sovereignty of the federally recognized American Indian tribes. This statute of Act 31 is often considered the heart of the act because this provides the most concrete directive to schools in what they need to do. And as a result of this statute, most districts follow a general model like this. And if you think back to your elementary education, I do recall my fourth grade teacher actually being very passionate about American Indians. And so I had that fourth grade Wisconsin history class where we learned how to read a map of Wisconsin, and we learned about how Native Americans were a huge part of our history, and we had to usually write first person narratives about them. And then in fifth grade, we got a little bit deeper. And then in seventh grade, I do recall as well the civics class. And then in eighth grade, a little bit more U.S. history. And then in high school provides a variety of courses that may focus on American Indians, uh, to which there are many numerous opportunities. There's also a unique cultural academic need of these students, which may not be able to be covered by states, and so the federal government provides grants to local education agencies as well as American Indian nations and tribes. As well, teachers and local agencies can apply for competitive grant opportunities for special programs and projects to improve educational opportunities for Indian children. As well, Title VII, Part A authorizes other expenditures such as fellowships, gifted and talented education, and tribal educational planning grants. Impact on the school district of Janesville. I teach at Craig High School. However, I do know that Act 31 necessitated all the buildings in our district to have create teams to address culturally related academic needs. We don't have a huge population of Native Americans at Craig High School. It's less than 1%. However, in a video that I linked to my post from Jeff Ryan, as well as Rican, those two teachers pointed out that really this act was about non-Native students, so that they would become more aware of Native needs. And so, even though they're not a huge population in my district, it's still important that we have this culturally related team, culturally responsive team. As well, the statute does say that African Americans and Latinos need to be included in our investigations. We also have influence from Community Action, which is a nonprofit in our county. And one of the big things that they've done most recently is provide courageous conversations training, which teaches teachers how to have conversations about uncomfortable topics, such as uh, talking about race and American Indian history. And also recently, we had a group of students come forward to talk about why we still read Huck Finn, but it wasn't that they didn't want it to be read anymore, but that they wanted teachers to become better at being able to have conversations about the topics that come up in such books. Um, Also, as a result of all of this work, we also now have a diversity literature class as well as a multicultural American history class, which students can take in addition to the required United States history. So there you have it, a brief overview of Act 31, why it came to be in the 80s and 90s with the race tensions between Indians and non-Indians. Many people feeling that they didn't want their kids to grow up as one of the exemplar teachers said in one of my links in my post, that they didn't want to see their kids grow up to become quote unquote rock throwers who would meet at the boat landing of Indians coming back from spearfishing, which was their right to what Act 31 actually provides, and a little window into how that impacts my district.